It was a peaceful evening. The sun was just beginning to set behind the hills, casting a warm orange glow over our quiet neighborhood. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Soft hums of the radio played in the background. My son Eric had just come home from university this weekend. There was this serene, calming energy in the house, the kind that only comes with familiarity. It was almost like yesterday, when Eric was this little boy who followed me around the house, asking me endless questions about life. Now he was already 21 years old. He is no longer the little boy I did not remember, but a strong, confident, and sometimes unconsciously distant young man. The dynamic between us had changed with age, and it was something I was still getting used to. Dinner was ready, and I called him from the living room. As we sat down at the table, I caught the way he wasn't looking at me, different, intense, in a way that made me pause. I didn't think much about it at first, just my imagination. We talked about his classes, his friends, and how much he missed his house, but also about the way he spoke, his eyes. It stayed a little longer on mine than it should have, leaving me with this strange, inexplicable feeling in my gut. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together, a custom we always followed before he left for college. The living room was more comfortable than usual, with the soft cushions and dim lights, making it just perfect for a quiet night. I really couldn't remember the last time we spent such a peaceful evening together. As the film was filming, I found myself watching it a lot more than I should have, noticing how it had finally grown into itself. He was no longer the child I had raised, but a man, and just as I was starting to feel a strange sense of unease about the thoughts that were running through my mind, he leaned over to me on the couch. At first, I thought it was an accident, that it was something that happened all the time, this kind of chance contact. But then his hand brushed against mine, and a spark flashed through me. Something electric, something I knew I shouldn't feel. I withdrew my hand, surprised by the intensity of the moment. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked. His voice was soft, almost worried. I looked at him, my heart pounding, not knowing what to do. "Don't say anything, my darling, just tired, that's all." But I tried to push that feeling aside and pray that he hadn't understood it, and still in that deep part of me, I knew in that moment that something had changed, something we could no longer ignore. There was this line between mother and son that seemed to suddenly blur, and even though neither of us had crossed it, the air was heavy with unspoken thoughts. So we sat in silence, the movie buzzing, but neither of us paid attention to it anymore. I got up to tell her I needed to go to bed early, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced. I knew I couldn't let this feeling grow. I had to keep my distance for the sake of both of us. But deep down, I didn't know how the next morning I woke up feeling unsettled by the events of the night before, played over and over again in my mind. I tried to get rid of that feeling, convincing myself that it had all been in my head, that I was his mother, nothing more, nothing less. I loved him deeply, but not in a way that could never be misinterpreted. I was irrational. I said to myself. Eric was already up when I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. Maybe it was really nothing, just a strange moment that only I had noticed. I decided to get it out of my mind, at least for now. "Morning," I said, forcing myself to smile, trying to look as normal as possible. "Morning, Mom," he replied, in a relaxed, easy voice. I thought I would hike later. "Want to join me for a hike?" It had been ages since we had done anything like this together. I hesitated for a moment, not knowing if I should spend more time alone with him after how I had felt last night, but I remembered that it was just a mother and son spending time together. There was nothing wrong with that. "Sure," I said. "That looks nice." Later in the afternoon, we went to a nearby trail, a place we had been to several times when he was younger. The air was crisp, the sky bright blue, and for a moment everything seemed normal. We walked. We walked side by side, talking about nothing in particular. Old memories, his plans for the future, the usual chatter. The more we walked and talked, the more I laughed, felt comfortable with him, thinking that I might have overreacted the night before. But as we moved along the path, there were times when our conversation fell silent, leaving a lasting silence heavier than it should have been. At one point, As we reached a clearing that offered a spectacular view of the valley below, Eric stopped walking and turned to me. "You've always been there for me, Mom," he said, his soft but serious voice. "I don't know what I'd do without you." There was just something about the way he said that caught me off guard, that vulnerability in his tone that suddenly made my heart ache. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you won't have to worry about that anytime soon," I joked. "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't laugh. Instead, he moved closer, his eyes fixing on mine. "No, I think so," he continued. "You have always been more than my mother. You were everything." I froze. The words snagged in the air, heavy and thick with a meaning I wasn't ready to talk about. I searched his face for an indication that he was only sentimental, that it was just a harmless hug, but something in his eyes, something that made my heart do another little leap like he had done the night before. "Eric," I said, my voice being little more than a whisper. "You know how much I love you, don't you?" "Of course," he said, getting even closer. "I love you too, more than you realize." My heart was pounding. This was not how a mother and her son were supposed to talk, to look at each other. My mind screamed at me to step back, to put a little distance between us, but my body felt frozen in place. "I think we should go back," I said, my voice trembling. "It's getting late." But before I could turn away, he reached out to me and gently took my hand. The touch was innocent enough, but the way he clung to, the way his thumbs slowly grazed my skin, made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with something I couldn't really name. "I don't know how to say that, but something I shouldn't, and I think you felt it too." Panic washed over me as I pushed my hand away, pulling back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eric, stop," I whispered, my voice being nothing more than a trembling breath. "That's not what you mean. You're confused." He looked at me, his eyes a mixture of confusion and pain.
"Mom, I'm not confused."
"I know how I feel." "No," I repeated, shaking my head once more. "It's not fair. You are my son. We can't." The sentence hung there unfinished. The words were too dangerous, too heavy to be spoken aloud. Eric let out a deep breath. His face darkened, and his eyes showed the emotion of every word he uttered. I know, it's not right, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." Tears flowed as I did my best to keep my emotions in check. This was not the case. This could not happen. I needed to stop it before it got worse, before we did anything that we could never take back. "I am your mother," I said, my voice breaking, "and I love you, but not like this." We can't." The words hung between us like a thick, suffocating fog. I could see the pain in his eyes, the way his shoulders were slumping in defeat. He nodded, looking at the ground as if he was ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't want to. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the overwhelming mix of emotions that was swirling inside me. "It's I'm fine," I said softly, though I wasn't so sure it really was. "Let's go home." The way back was suffocatingly silent. Eric didn't say a word, and neither did I, heavy between us. The weight of what had been said on the trail remained silent. I watched the road as if I were in slow motion, my mind faltering to understand what had just happened. I couldn't believe the words that had escaped his lips, the feelings he had revealed. It was as if everything I thought was so safe about our relationship was overturned. Finally, when we parked in the driveway, Eric mumbled something about going to his room. I didn't try to stop him as he disappeared down the stairs. Slumping on the couch, my body began to shake from the emotions I was finally releasing with all the things I had held back since that moment on the trail. I didn't know how to make sense of it all. He was my son, my little boy, but he wasn't a boy anymore. And with each passing moment, it became terribly clear that our relationship carried its most unexpected complication. I wanted to believe that her feelings were just a phase, something fleeting that would pass over time. But the way he had looked at me, the way his hand had lingered on mine, told me otherwise. Part of me felt guilty, like maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I had been too affectionate, too close over the years, but it wasn't fair, was it? Mothers were supposed to love their sons, to feed them, to be there for them. That was all I had ever done, but now it all seemed to be tainted by the strange tension that had developed between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. The rest of the day, I tried to avoid it, to take care of household chores and anything else that could distract me from the confusion I felt. In the evening, I was exhausted. I didn't want to face what was to come, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Eric and I couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine when in reality it was far from it. That night, after lying in bed for hours, tossing and turning, I heard a knock on my door. Immediately, my heart sank because I knew it was him. "Mom, can I come in?" Eric's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I didn't mean yes, really. My mind was screaming at me to create some distance between him and me by saying no, but deep down, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. I had to deal with that, even though it was going to make me uncomfortable. "Let me in," I said softly, and I pulled up the blankets around me as if they could protect me from the storm of emotions about to descend. Eric entered, looking as conflictual as I was, unsure as me. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment, not sure what to do with himself. After a few seconds, he sat on the edge of the bed, but kept his distance. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier. I don't know what got into me." I nodded slowly, trying to find the right words. "I know it's confusing," I said, "but what happened earlier can't happen again, Eric. We have to be careful. That's not how things are supposed to be, I know." He whispered with his eyes down, "But it's so hard, Mom. I don't know why I feel like this." I tried to push him away, but it just keeps coming back. His words hit something deep inside me. I felt an overwhelming feeling of sadness for him, as both of them imagined themselves being there. But there we were, trapped in a web of emotions that neither of us knew how to unravel. "I'm your mother," I repeated, my voice, soft but firm. "That's all I can ever be. You know it's true." He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain, but he nodded. "I know," he said. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me," I assured him, "but we have to set boundaries. Eric, it's dangerous territory for a while." There was a silence between us. The tension from earlier in the day still persisted, but there was also a tacit understanding that things could not remain as they were. We both knew it, even when neither of us wanted to fully realize it. "Probably better if you go back to school tomorrow," I said softly. "I think we need space for our heads to clear." Eric nodded with a sad expression but said softly, "Yes, maybe you're right." The next morning, he packed his bags. The air between us was thick with unresolved feelings. I wanted to give him a hug, to tell him that everything would be okay, but I couldn't force myself to do it, not after all that had happened. When he finally left the house, she felt emptier than she had been in years. I sat on the couch looking out the window and trying to digest it all. I knew we both made the right choice by putting a little distance between us, but it didn't make it any easier. The relationship between a mother and a son was supposed to be simple.
Pure.
Yet ours had become something quite different, something that none of us knew how to handle. As the days went by, I tried to get back into my routine, but it wasn't the same. The house was too quiet without Eric, and I found myself thinking way too much about him. I really wish I could have believed that space would help us, that it would provide both of us with the space we needed to square our feelings, but deep down, I knew that things would never go back to the way they were. Something had changed between us, and there was no turning back. I wasn't the same anymore, and neither was he. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and just listen to my story. Don't forget to subscribe and tap on that notification icon for more videos like this.